It's a clash of legends. Garry Kasparov versus Nigel Short in a blitz showdown. You know this is going to be a classic. Kasparov opens with e4, and we get a French defense from Short. But Garry sidesteps the main lines with a King's Indian attack setup. Both sides develop logically, getting their pieces into the game. They both castle kingside, and Short begins to claim space on the queen side with his pawns. And there's the key move, pawn to e5. Kasparov locks the center, forcing Short's knight to retreat back to d7. Right here, Kasparov has a chance to really clamp down on the position, but he hesitates. The engine points to a much more ambitious path. The pawn pushes to d4, seizing the center. Black plays bishop to a6. White's knight calmly drops to f1. The bishops are exchanged on e2, and the queen recaptures, cementing a clear advantage. But in the game, Kasparov plays the knight back to f1, a passive move that lets his edge slip away, and Short returns the favor immediately. Knight to c6 is played, but this misses a golden opportunity to strike back with pawn to d4 himself. Given a second chance, Kasparov doesn't miss. Pawn to d4, and now White is the one controlling the center. Wow! A brilliant shot from Short. The bishop flies out to a6, a fantastic exchange sacrifice designed to rip open lines for his rooks. Kasparov accepts the challenge, taking the bishop on a6. The game enters a complex maneuvering phase. Kasparov repositions his queen and knight, while Short launches a pawn storm on the queen side. The tension is electric. Kasparov sends his knight to g4, signaling an attack on the king, while Short's queenside pawns keep rolling forward. Black is under pressure and needs to find the right defensive plan. The move played is an inaccuracy, as a better idea was to deal with White's kingside threat directly. The pawn should have pushed to h5, kicking the knight. After knight to e3, the queen swings to a5. Rook to b1 is met by rook to b8, and Black's position is solid. Instead of that, Short plays rook to b6, a move that's just a little too slow, giving Kasparov time to build his attack. Kasparov's queen grabs the pawn on a4. A few more repositioning moves follow as both players prepare for the decisive phase of the game. And here comes the storm. Kasparov pushes his pawn to g4, trading it off to rip open lines against the black king. Another slip from Short. Rook to b11 is far too slow. He missed a chance to play queen to a5, which would have won a pawn and created real counterplay. A calm and deadly move from Kasparov. The king steps aside to h1, clearing the way for his rooks to join the attack. This is a critical error from Short. He's completely focused on the queen side, but the game is about to be decided on the king side. A defensive move was essential. The queen had to go to e8. Then, after rook to g1, pawn to f5 challenges White's center. The pawns trade on f6, and the knight recaptures, holding the fortress. But in the game, Short plays the knight to a5, ignoring the fire on the other side of the board, and this allows Kasparov a winning attack. And Kasparov doesn't hesitate. The rook slides to g1, the bishop comes to g5, and all of White's pieces are pointed at the king. Short creates some nuisance threats on the queen side with his rook, but Kasparov is laser-focused, bringing his queen to f4 to intensify the pressure. The bishop lands on h6, a crushing move that puts unbearable pressure on the weak g7 square. This is the breaking point. Black's defense is hanging by a thread, and this move cuts it. There was only one path to survival. The king had to run to e8. White would take on g7, queen to b8 defense. The queen comes to h6, and the king continues its escape to d8. But in the actual game, Short plays the rook to e2, a fatal mistake that allows White's attack to crash through with decisive force, and Kasparov strikes. The bishop takes the pawn on g7 with check, a fantastic defensive try. The king runs to e8, the only move to keep the game going, even in this desperate position. But here's Kasparov's point. The queen swings to h6. The knight blocks on f8. But White simply takes the knight on f8, and after the recapture, the attack rages on. Another piece joins the attack. The knight leaps into h6, and the net tightens around the king. Under tremendous pressure, Short plays knight to b6, but it's another inaccuracy. The better try was queen to b6 to try and trade pieces. The queen takes the pawn on f7 with the check. The king hunt is on. Black's king is dragged out into the open, stepping to d7, and the knight jumps to g5, cutting off the escape squares. The king continues to flee, but this is the wrong way out. A more stubborn defense was possible, though the position is already dire. Knight to b3 was the better try. After rook to e1, the rooks would be exchanged. And again on e1, and the king could try to escape via c6. Back in the game, though, the king runs to c8, which walks into a tactic that wins material for White. A rare slip from Kasparov in a winning position. He's still completely dominant, but there was a much cleaner, more brutal way to win. The knight taking on e6 was crushing. After queen to d7, the queen checks on g8, the bishop blocks on d8, and bishop to f6 wins a pawn and ends the game. But instead of that, Garry plays queen takes pawn on e6 with check, a move which allows black to trade queens and relieve some of the pressure. The king sidesteps the check, moving to b8. The knight comes to f7. It's a very strong move, but not the most precise, as bishop to f6 would have kept all of white's threats alive. Black's queen moves to c7 to cover the king, and Kasparov calmly repositions his knight to f5 to continue the assault, a last-ditch effort from short. The rook grabs the pawn on f2, hoping to create some counterplay. Brilliant! A stunning sacrifice. Knight to d6. This incredible move deflects the bishop and completely shuts down any hope for black. The recapture is forced, the bishop takes the knight on d6, and Kasparov's other knight recaptures, taking its place. And here, under immense strain, comes the final blunder. This move is a tragedy, as it loses on the spot. A different queen move was needed. Queen to d7 was the only try. After queen to g4, the queens would be traded. The rook recaptures, and black's rook could move to d7 to defend. But in the game, short's queen takes the bishop on g7. A fatal mistake that walks right into a simple tactic that loses a piece, and Kasparov simply takes the free queen on g7. The rook recaptures on g7. It's the only move, a great find in a hopeless position, but the damage is done. Black is down a full piece. And the final nail in the coffin, rook to g1. The black rook is pinned and will be lost. A beautiful finishing touch. And after that, Nigel Short resigns. White wins. He's down a piece with no counterplay, and Kasparov's attack is overwhelming. Here's just one way the pain could have continued. If the rook moves to d7, the queen checks on e8. The king runs to a7. The queen comes to g6, and there's no defense against white's threats.